Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, 2015 Predictions, Trends Driving Data Discovery. My name is Colleen Lezovitz and I'm a marketing manager at Qlik, and I'm joined by my colleague James Richardson, business analyst strategist, who has 20 years BI, analytics, and performance management experience. Prior to joining Qlik, James spent 6 years as a Gartner analyst covering BI and analytics. You will also be hearing from Josh Good, Director of Product Marketing at Qlik. At the end of the webinar, Josh will be showing you some real-life examples of the trends James will be discussing. Before we begin, just some quick instructions regarding the webinar. As you can see, we are utilizing WebEx. All participants will be on mute throughout the entire session. However, if you have any technical issues, please utilize the Q&A window in the bottom right-hand corner of the console. Please also use this window to submit questions at any time pertaining to the topics presented, because we will be reserving some time at the end for Q&A. This session is being recorded, so all attendees will receive an email with a link to the on-demand afterwards. At this time, I would like to hand things over to James. James?
Thank you, Colleen, and hello everybody. Welcome to this webinar from a very snowy England. Not quite as snowy as the east coast of the US, but snowy for us. Okay, so for the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to be talking about some of the macro trends that are driving data discovery. I think to be responsible, what we should do at the beginning is probably define what we mean by data discovery, which was the, I suppose, new flavor of business intelligence, the business intelligence software market, pioneered by Qlik some time ago now. The definition that I refer to is the one from my old employer from Ghana from 2008, which really looks at 3 attributes to define a data discovery tool. The first thing was that the product had to have an intuitive, visual, or search-driven UI that could be picked up and used with little to no training very quickly and effectively by business people. The second attribute was that the data discovery platforms had to have a data structure to store and model data from disparate sources, whilst minimizing the need for pre-built metadata, so effectively looking for joins and associations and building that out. And the third attribute was speed, really, a performance layer using in-memory, sort of RAM-based processing and or indexing to lessen the need for things that had been required to drive performance in BI tools before, so aggregates and summaries and pre-calculations, which, while delivering some speed, restricted flexibility. So the data discovery tools were effectively intuitive to use with a quick-to-build data structure and high performance in terms of queries. That was the definition in the space that was originally put out there back in 2008 by Kurt Schlegel. I suppose that's all well and good, but what does it mean and why does it matter and why is this required? So we're going to talk about some of those trends. To put a little frame around that, though, it's probably worth looking at, well, data discovery's been out there for some time. What's going on with it? Is it going quickly? Well, it's interesting. If you look at this quote from Dan Summer and Frank Boutendijk in a report published towards the end of last year, it said that data discovery as a segment represents about 15% of the BI platform market, but it weighs in at multiples of that in share of growth, usage, and footprint, and net new buying. And key for me is the observation here that for 2014, a reasonable estimate is that half of net new BI platform software buying will be driven by data discovery. So you're really talking about a tipping point, about a change. But at the first half of that particular quote, though, highlights that the vast bulk of the business intelligence that most people are still using today is report-led, is old style, is probably not quite delivering on the promise that they wanted. However, the tipping point and the new investment has certainly been reached. And again, why? What are the trends that are driving people to adopt and will continue to change the way that we behave around data discovery moving forwards? So that's what I'm going to do for the next 38 minutes, is talk about 7 trends, some of which you've probably encountered already and are relatively self-evident, some less so, which are driving people and driving the market through that tipping point. They're in different areas too. Some are technology, some are about demography, and some are about the nature of business as it is today. The first one is really about technology. It's about human-computer interaction. It's about the fact that we're moving to a point where we're starting to be able to remove some of the barriers between people and their data. I think that's really, really important if we think about what business intelligence and data discovery tools actually are for. They're for driving better decision making, but you can only do that if we deal with the constraints of today's computing. We can't plug ourselves into the computers yet. It's not William Gibson. We've not arrived at that point. And until we get to that point, we're constrained by the physical interface between the person and the processor. And that's important because really what we're trying to do with data discovery is to remove that barrier, is to allow people to effectively live in their data with something that is working as fast as they think, is firing off their neurons, which is what we're showing here. The average human brain has 80 to 100 billion neurons in it. And they're the things that we're paid to use. And unfortunately, if human-computer interaction isn't up to the mark, we find that people are really disenfranchised or removed from using their data. Just as a point of comparison, the highest transistor count on a commercial CPU available today is about 4.3 billion. That's an Intel 15-core Ivy Bridge for the technology people out there. So there's a huge gap. And what we're trying to say is the computing power that we have available to us now is very, very impressive. But it's only useful if we can give people technologies to make decisions and to analyze and to explore data that move as fast as they think, that display the kinds of performance that people need. So taking advantage of new human-computer interaction models. And it's very stark. Most of you out there are probably listening to the webinar sat at something that is effectively a steampunk device. The human-computer interaction that you have, your main method is still through the QWERTY keyboard, which actually comes from 1878. An American guy called Latham Scholl, working for Remington, laid out the QWERTY keyboard based on English language letter frequencies. It's somewhat amazing that this mechanical device designed to stop the levers in a typewriter getting tangled up with each other is still the main mechanism all over the world where people don't even speak English, never mind 1878 English, to interact with computing, to interact with their very powerful silicon devices. And what we're seeing in the data discovery market is we're starting to take advantage of a shift in interactivity. And that shift has been very evident through initially multi-touch and increasingly through the use of voice processing, voice to compute, which allows us to stop thinking too deeply about what we're doing with the data, but just to do it. This is about being in a psychological state called a state of flow, where you look at the data, you examine the data, and you unconsciously or move through that data and understand it. The analogy I use it is somewhat like driving. When you drive for a distance and you've been driving automatically, we start to see that. You begin to see it in the world of games, and we're beginning to see it in the interaction models that we have through visualization and through association in data discovery. Really, really important driver when we look at removing the barriers between people and the data sets that they have in their organizations. It's a key point. It's interesting that people give more credence to something they can touch than something they can't. For example, this is a different area. This is not in data discovery, but it's been shown that, for example, in insurance brokerage, if people are using the same app that a broker was using on a laptop in front of them and they're using it themselves on a touch-driven device, they're far more likely to believe or to have credence in the analysis. And those organizations have seen somewhat like a 30% uplift in their ability to sell. And that's because we give credence to things that we can touch. And that's very, very important when we think about how we help people that aren't data scientists, people that are just business decision makers and they need to get hold of the data and use it whatever form they want, and for that human-computer interaction to be effective. And data discovery certainly takes advantage of that, some of those changes. And more of that will come, obviously, as those developed. But I've talked about data, and data is the second trend. The accelerating data boom, you hear about it everywhere. I think there's no point in laboring the term too much. It's most obvious. The requirement to analyze more data is creeping into all aspects of our lives. The IDC organization forecast that data in the world will grow by something like a factor of 40 or 44 from 2010 to 2020. That's 0.8 to 35.2 zettabytes, which means nothing to me. There's just huge amounts of data. What does actually mean something to me is a significant change in the fact that data is in all of our aspects of our lives, through our personal fitness and personal health, into how we analyze our driving habits as internet-connected cars become available. The data is all around us. We're living in a soup of data, and it will become even more so through the use of devices that have the sensors on them that become ubiquitous. This is a slide from Intel, from the Intel Labs organization, that was saying that by 2020 there will be 31 billion devices connected to the internet. At that point, there'll only be 8.4 billion people. Now, obviously, we have multiple devices each, but many of those devices will be effectively autonomous. They'll be on lampposts or around your pet's neck, or on the little tabs that you can get now to track individual objects. We are seeing an accelerating data boom that really requires technology that allows us to explore data as humans. There is obviously a trend and a prediction towards machine-based sense-making of data. But when you put that next to the requirement for decision-making that we have, many of the decisions we need to make really cannot be handed over to machines. They're too ambiguous, and they require human agency. And that means that one of the things that's driving data discovery is a requirement to explore and analyze many different data types. I think the personal side of this is very, very interesting. If you go back a few years ago, those that have been doing BI, the requirement to draw data from multiple sources together in one place and make sense of them was an organizational or commercial problem. It's actually a problem that's becoming a personal or family problem. How do we bring the data from all our Fitbits and mobile phones and things together to allow us to understand ourselves? I think that is a significant change. But it's not as if the volumes of data that we can analyze are necessarily that new. We've had massive volumes of data for a long time. It just becomes even more massive. The question becomes, can we store it and can we do something with it? With cloud-based storage and with things like Hadoop and MongoDB and other NoSQL databases, we do begin to have unprecedented access to cost-effective computing, storage, and power. But it's still cost unless we do something valuable with it, unless we analyze it and we turn it into insight. And this is one of the key drivers for us as an organization, is getting people to understand and use the data. And it's interesting for me, even before business intelligence, I worked in the field called SCADA, which is Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition, which is part of the, looking at, say, production lines. We have sensors all over the production line. Now, the cost of storing data then was very, very pricey. So we would store the data from our sensors and our production lines in systems for a relatively short period into what was called a SCADA historian. And then we would throw it away, or we would effectively put it onto tape. The same thing, right? The reality is we were therefore not using the data asset to get value, to allow us to do what we needed to do to look back at performance over time. Now that has changed. That dynamic has gone. We can now store that data. But again, it is only valuable if we can start to use lenses on it. And that is a driver for us. So two technology drivers: improvements in technology consumerization and human-computer interaction through different styles of interaction with the data sets. And then the data sets themselves, which are growing exponentially to the point where we start to need more and more help to make sense. So that's two technology drivers, the first two. The third one for me is a demographic change pushing people towards data discovery, which is what I call the rise of information activism. We're seeing now a shift where in the past people were relatively passive with the data sets that they would be given. You would consume them. Here is my dashboard, here are my KPIs. I look at them. But we're seeing across different areas now, people, including journalists and governmental workers, that are sharing and using information, that are crowdsourcing information, that are being far more active with information, both as individuals and within communities. Part of that is to do with the rise of the millennials. The internet, get it right, James, the World Wide Web is, just over 20 years old now. We have a whole generation of people about to emerge from our education systems in the Western world that have only ever known instant access to information. They have a requirement and an understanding and an expectation that they will be able to self-serve, that they will be able to navigate through the information in the organizations that they begin to work for as they join the workforce. And they are pushing us towards an environment where we interact with data, where we make that much more active to make cases, to explore and to self-actualize ourselves, but also to forward our careers in organizations. So the millennials, though, for me, I'm older than that, right? But I think I and many of my colleagues and many of you on the phone, we have this curiosity, this desire to not just consume data, but to turn it into something, to express our opinion, to talk about the things that we like or the things that interest us or bug us. I mean, here's an example. This is one of a little shot of a demo screen in a Qlik product, which is on football games in the USA. I think it's the Thanksgiving football games. Now, this is about visualization, visualizing data as a means of self-expression. And we see these kinds of artifacts created across all the different data vendors where people are taking often the free download version of that product, and they're doing it and they're using it to create and to tell stories. And that's the key thing. The key thing is it's not just about visualizing the data. If you're just visualizing the data, you're really just creating a description of a data set. We see this with the quantified self movement, where people are measuring how many cups of coffee they drink and things like that, how many beers they've had, how many miles they've run. Visualization is there as a self-expression. The difference that we see in the world of data discovery in organizations is that when we tell stories with data, which is a really strong rising trend, we tell the stories for a particular reason. The stories are to prompt an action. The stories are not to sit down and to listen to and go, well, that was nice, and walk away from. The stories are there to do what business intelligence has always been about, which is about decision making. But we have a decision gap. In most of our BI solutions, we do not capture the decision because the decision is not modeled in our organizations. What we do is we assume that a dial moving on a needle moving on a dashboard or an alert being created has caused somebody to do something. But very often the collaboration to do that, the mechanism to push that insight, has been lacking. It's not been within the business intelligence system. And that's changing with Qlik and with data discovery, where we're talking about telling stories with data to prompt action. The critical thing here, though, about the data storytelling is that it should drive a debate. The story is not a perfect artifact where you sit back and say, this was great literature, I really enjoyed this, I will go and contemplate it. No, it's not that kind of story. It's the kind of story that's there to prompt argument and debate and discussion. The story is there to try and persuade someone or a group of people to take an action based upon a data insight. This is not new. This has been going on for a long time. But what is new is the level of interactivity, because the debate then prompts the questioning of the data and the mutual exploration of the data. And that is what is changing. When I say it's not new, I'm going to give you an example of how far back this storytelling goes. I said before at the beginning, for those of you who are on, I'm in England, so this is a story from the UK. It's a classic one that you sometimes hear around visualization. And it tells the story of a guy called Dr. John Snow, who was based in London in the 1850s. London was the biggest city in the world at the time, about 5 times the size of New York City. It was massively internationally connected because of what used to be the British Empire that went right the way from Canada to Hong Kong, and that brought lots of trade and lots of wealth to the city. It also brought, for the first time, the serious international transmission of disease, including new things like cholera. And cholera arrived in London in the 1850s. And this John Snow, a hero of mine, a doctor, was trying to understand the transmission of this disease. And it was a very important problem at the time. In 1854, there was an outbreak on the 31st of August on Broad Street in Soho. And in 3 days, it killed 127 people. By the 10th of September, so less than 2 weeks later, it had killed more than 500 people, and people were leaving the area. Kind of puts Ebola in context. Very similar, very dangerous. John Snow didn't believe the current medical theory at the time, which was that the miasma, the smell of the River Thames, where all the sewage went in those days, was the thing causing the disease. And what he tried to do was convince the powers that his theory, that transmission by of the germ by water, which is what actually happens as we know now, was going on. And he couldn't get them to understand. I mean, he made rows and columns of data, much like this, like analysts often do. He made rows and columns of data. And then he tried to convince people that behavior needed to change and the disease was being spread in a different way. And he could not. So he had a moment of insight, an epiphany, and he visualized the data. He visualized it on a map. And each of the little lines that you can see on here, they're not buildings, they represent deaths. And yeah, there's a workhouse on there, really like Oliver Twist, the middle of the screen. What John Snow did through his visualization is realize that he was able to both convince and back up his own theory by looking at proximity to one particular water pump, which was on Broad Street, where the people that were drawing their water from that pump were the ones that were becoming ill because it was contaminated by sewage from a local cesspit. Horrible story. The interesting thing is the visualization helped people take immediate action. They took the handle off the pump. But the problem is here that the story was not strong enough to convince the powers that be at the time to change the current theory. So he went to the Royal College of Surgeons, they didn't believe him, and the current theory stayed as being spread by the smell, and really nothing was done for 50 years or so after this around the spread of cholera. He didn't have the ability to engage the people with the data that he was trying to convince, and that's the point I'm trying to make. The visual is valuable, and the visual is a powerful communication tool, but it's also about getting to the point of the story where people can debate it with you and you can explore the information together and iterate through it. Everyone wants to tell stories. Everyone wants to get active with the data. So we're seeing this rise of information activism in journalism, in our organizations, and in our personal lives too. So that's two technology trends and a demographic trend that are affecting both us as individuals and in our world of work. The next few trends are focused specifically on what's happening within those organizations that we work for. The first one is obviously IT, corporate IT, organizational IT departments are impacted greatly by data discovery, and they in themselves are driving some of these requirements. So it's the consequence of the three prior trends. IT is in transition, both in its delivery models, which I'll talk about in a minute, and in the aspiration of what IT is for. Up until relatively recently, certainly within my working life, maybe 10 years or so ago, corporate IT was based on certainty. It was based on a world of certainty where we knew how people were going to consume the information that we provided, the information products that were made available to them, what device they were going to be on. They were probably going to be on a desktop PC. When they were going to do it, they would be there in the hours of work. And really the performance of the piece of technology they were going to be using to look at that piece of data. It was very manageable. It was very governable. But that certainty is gone. And the image that you can see at the moment is really to illustrate that uncertainty that we have now. It's a schematic from the middle of 2014 showing at the time Android screen sizes, the different devices available on the market in the mid-2014 period. Now, in a world of bring your own device, which is really the default model now for most organizations, IT cannot know what people are going to be looking at their information on, when they're going to be looking at it, on the move, at the desk, and things are therefore far more difficult. And that means the data discovery vendors like Qlik have to build responsiveness into the technology. People move from device to device and expect portability and the same experience across multiple devices. So the key thing here is to understand that IT, which was built on certainty before in terms of its delivery model, is now looking at, really, we have to rely on technology to allow us to give people an experience that they're going to find palatable to them. And as we know now, what happens is, because people can bring their own devices, they're quite militant about what pieces of technology they will actually use, both physically in hardware and also in software. There's the app rejection test now. You download an app, you like it. If you don't, you get rid of it very, very quickly. And that's compelling. That level of uncertainty, that level of change, that level of information activism is forcing the role of IT to shift. You know, we were in the position, I say we because I've been in IT for a long time, we're effectively gatekeepers for a long time. The answer usually from IT was no, or show me the business case, and we'll get to that point. Now we still need the business case, but we're moving to an environment where instead of being a gatekeeper, we're becoming a storekeeper. We're giving people the opportunity to find and help themselves through things like app factories, through a series of information products. We're effectively behaving like internal software houses, internal technology providers, riding the self-service or do-it-yourself ethic, which is now part of our organizations. The interesting thing, though, is that from a business intelligence point of view, self-service was always an aspiration. Semantic models, OLAP cubes, the requirement, the desire was always to do self-service, but unfortunately we were constrained by the performance of the technologies at the time and their flexibility to deliver on that. So one of the things that we're seeing is that there's the data discovery that has inbuilt flexibility, allows or supports the self-service model, which gives IT an ability to move towards being able to be a storekeeper, being able to have the kind of environment where we give people the opportunity to help themselves and do what they need to do. And this is a fundamental change in behavior, and it really reflects the pervasiveness of technology in our organizations now. And it's asking questions, or at least, you know, I suppose, pointing out that the iron CIO for a long time has really been about infrastructure. It's been about the provision of networks and the provisions of machinery. Even though it's been nominally information, only latterly does it become, do we get to the point where we start to understand and model information at the enterprise level, where we can drive value into the organization and get value from the data asset. And that is at the core of this, value from the data asset. The modern alchemy of turning asset into revenue or asset into customer retention is at the core of this. And that requires a different kind of thinking. It requires innovation. And visionary CIOs are really now becoming chief innovation officers. That's the, that's the mark that they're headed for. Now, you'll hear, and I've heard very often, that the top tech priority for CIOs in this year and last year and the year before, #1 priority was BI and analytics. It's no surprise. For me, all computers, it always will be the case. The reality is that our CIOs and IT departments are about exactly that. Compute power applied to information for insight. And we're starting to deliver that through data discovery. That's very, very important. So that's another trend. But the fifth trend that sits behind this is the broader business trend. The requirement that we differentiate our organizations through the information exploitation curve, that we take advantage of our information, and we do it quickly enough to be of value to decision makers in rapidly moving markets. So in the spirit of storytelling, here's another one. I relate, the best way of thinking about what corporate IT has done for the last 25 to 30 years with ERP systems is deliver reliability. We've looked at our business process flows, we've optimized them, we've removed complexity from them where we can, and we've got to the point where we are now relatively on parity with the other organizations that we compete with that have also been through the process of putting in ERPs. So that reliability, you relate that to what the car makers did. Mr. Toyota of Toyota in Japan looked at the car market back in the 1960s and 70s and realized that reliability, particularly here in Europe, UK cars were shockingly unreliable. The first sound you used to hear in the morning in the 1970s and 80s was of cars not starting, particularly on a cold morning like today. And what Mr. Toyota realized was that reliability, the car time would be a major way of entering markets that were really resistant to their products. So they put in place total quality management and Kaizen and new engineering systems and the Toyota production system to deliver a reliable experience Very similar to what corporate ID does. Let's improve the reliability of our processes. Let's look at the efficiency of process. That worked very well. But what Toyota realized, and what we're realizing with our corporate IT systems now, is that reliability in and of itself is not a differentiator. What Toyota found is if everybody copied Toyota's approach, which vendors did, including people like Volkswagen that built a whole marketing campaign around reliability, that if all of the cars start all of the time, how do you then differentiate yourselves? And what Toyota did again was realize that we need to do some differentiation through market segmentation, through understanding, through analysis of behavior. And that's why we have brands like Lexus and Infiniti today. So reliability to parity, and then differentiation through information exploitation. And that is what's happening in our corporate IT departments today, and why the BI systems before are not strong enough, because they do not allow individuals to explore and make decisions that get the value from their information quickly enough. And what we're seeing is a shift, a Gartner slide, old employer again, away from business applications at the center of what IT do to where analytic capabilities become central to what IT is and does. The problem with that is that our organizational model and our staffing in corporate IT sometimes is a bit of a bottleneck. The road narrows. And we've seen this for a long time in business intelligence. We've seen that with traditional tools that require heavy IT input and software development, we've got to the point where we can no longer service the requirements at the speed that the organization needs. So that self-service aspiration that I talked about before hasn't been delivered on until you get to the point where you're working with solutions like data discovery that don't require as much input in terms of modeling in advance. So you get to the point where you get beyond this to try and match your tempo. And matching the tempo of the delivery of information products to the tempo of business is really, really key in what we're changing our organizations to do now. If you think about agility, the requirement for agile, what we're talking about is the fact that the older style monolithic BI systems were not quick enough to reflect the reality of business problems that need to be answered in days or hours. 64% of execs surveyed, I forget who it was for, I think I'll find that and send it afterwards, said they have to make decisions in less than a day very often. Data discovery apps are agile enough to at least provide some support for that. I don't think that's a good idea, making a decision in less than a day. I'm a little bit slower than that. But nevertheless, providing a requirement, meeting a requirement where the decision environment or the envelope for decisions is relatively short is part of ordinary business. And that agility, that requirement for speed, is impacting businesses of all different types. It's the most obvious probably is the fashion industry, where you used to have 2 seasons a year, you know, and then along came Zara and H&M and organizations like that. They don't really have seasons anymore. They put out new products very, very quickly based on rising demand, and they innovate all the time. And that has put some of the older fashion vendors out of business, and we're seeing that in many areas. If you look at technology vendors, look at mobile phones, apart from Apple, lots of the other Asian vendors put out new versions very, very quickly. They're fast off the mark. So that requirement for agility, that requirement for rapidity is a core part of what we see as a driver behind people investing more into data discovery. So we're looking at an environment where those trends, so far I've talked about 2 technology trends, 1 demographic trend and 3 business trends. They are impacting the world of business intelligence and analytics directly itself. Things are altering in how we consume and understand information and what we expect to be able to do with our analytics. This is what we started with. This is where business intelligence was until relatively recently. Reports that were rearview mirror, that described the situation. And descriptive analytics, you know, the report that says what has happened in the past, or even the dashboard that says what is happening now, really don't help you understand the requirement that you might have to look at cause and effect, to understand the underlying drivers behind what the report describes. And then we see a situation where organizations are looking more and more at the predictive. Saying, okay, so we've described the situation, we're monitoring the situation, and we know where we want to go. Or we know where the data is leading. What can we do to anticipate that? How do we get some nudges into our organization to get them to understand that, hey, this particular revenue attribute, or this particular revenue on this particular product is declining, and here's where it's going to go in the next 2 periods. So we're seeing really the slow move away from prediction just being in the hands of mavens and data scientists to it being embedded as Monte Carlo simulations or what-if analysis inside BI. But the missing one here, and the number that, and I suppose the attribute that reflects the 85% of the market that are still using old-style BI, is they're not looking at diagnostics. And for us, diagnostic analytics, which in layman's terms is the ability to answer the why questions about your data and to explore data, is the key driver behind the growth of data discovery. Delivering that information in a visual form is part of it, but it's more than that. It's about delivering a navigation experience through data that allows people to follow information sent, to spot outliers, and to say, okay, why is the outlier like that? What are those things connect to that in that way? And to do the why analysis. So describing and monitoring and anticipating have been effectively long-term BI value propositions. But the ability to roll your sleeves up, to explore the data, and to make discoveries is the key attribute of data discovery and exploration. And that is what people really want to be able to do when they're doing their information activism, when they're telling their stories. That's the engine behind that narrative. That's the engine behind that change. I want to describe and monitor the situation. I want to diagnose, and then I want to anticipate. I want to tell a story about it. That change in the nature of analytics in our organizations, that change in the nature of IT, is impacting a broader and broader group of people. And that's the other thing causing the shift. Decision-making is no longer in the hands of the top 20% in our organization, the managers alone. Decision-making is spread throughout our organizations, as it has been for a long time. But now it's facilitated, or should be facilitated, through better access to data, through all of those data repositories that I mentioned earlier on. So, 7 trends that are driving people to use data discovery. And as a result, we've reached this rebalancing point. Business intelligence is tipping away from descriptive reporting and really just pure visualization. I mean, we've been able to do charts for a long time, to diagnostic analysis and discovery, where visualization is an attribute of that. So it's rebalancing away, not from just discovering or picturing what has happened, but to describing why that's happened, and to giving people the ability to debate that. And to finish on, a quote again, finishing on the final one, just to really reiterate what I've been saying, a decisive tipping point away from older semantic layer architectures, so reporting in OLAP and query and dashboards, has happened. The tables have turned where budgets are focused on analysis-centric BI. So that really corroborates what's been driving the growth of the market that we are in, that Qlik has pioneered. The rising requirement for storytelling, the change towards anticipatory analysis, giving people behavioral nudges so they look at the data as to, in terms of future. They are starting to alter the behaviors in our organizations and to put some stress behind the evolution of IT. So in your organization, you need to think about these 7 trends. How are we taking advantage of new human-computer interaction models? And that could be through touch, it could be through voice, it could be through natural language, it could be through search. What are we doing to reach into other data sets that we haven't reached to before? And do we have a technology that allows us to very quickly bring those disparate sets together and look at them? Considering the arrival of the millennials and the rise of information activism to allow people to tell stories about data, it's critically important. And then behind that, the business trends, the evolving role of IT, the requirement to differentiate our businesses based on how good we are at exploiting our information. Really massively important. And doing that at the speed of business, the speed that business demands, to deal with questions that are here today and gone tomorrow. And then reorienting your BI solution away from the rearview mirror towards the sat-nav to allow you to think about direction but based on diagnosis. I always think it's very interesting that people get awfully excited about dashboards, which is fine, but when I take my car in, if there's something wrong with it, the mechanic doesn't look at the dashboard. He plugs his computer in and looks at the engine and does some diagnostics on why this is. And that is the key point, the why that drives discovery, that drives exploration, that drives storytelling, and in turn drives action and change. And that is about the value from the data. So that's 43 minutes. What we're going to do now is show you my colleague Josh Good. He's going to show you some of the trends in action in a short software demo. So Josh, if you're there, over to you.
Thanks very much, James. So I'm just getting my screen shared here, and what I'm going to show you today is I'm going to show you how this all comes together. And I think the thing that we really got from James's talk is things are changing a lot, and what we really need to start looking at is how this is going to be different for into the future. And so I'm going to show you everything on the iPad today, and I'm going to show you how someone like literally my daughter here, this is when she was a little bit younger before she could use an iPad. She was 8 months old here, but literally what she could do in terms of interacting with technology now. She's 2 now, and she can use an iPad. So that's how intuitive this is. And by the way, I don't let her use an iPad. She taught herself, and she stole it from us. Yeah. So all this touch, you go, you start always where are all the answers? All the answers are on the internet. So we'll go right out to a web browser, and we'll jump into QlikSense. So fully web enabled, and we can look through the various streams that IT has set up for us, and I can jump into an app. And when I jump into the app, it presents me the data in nice rich visuals, and I can scroll through what I'm looking at. So everything here that I've done so far, it's fully touch, it's rich visuals, and I actually can just readjust however I'd like to look at it. Now, when I want to interact, actually the first way I may want to interact is through search, when I want to move it through my data. And so I can go up to the search here, and I can use that search, and that's the same search that I'm used to using anywhere on the internet. Search is so powerful. We all know how powerful it is in our daily lives, and it should be just as powerful and be just as integral when we're doing analytics. So maybe I'm looking at this, and I know that there are some users who have been tagged as low performers. And I can simply filter on those. Now, you'll notice what I just did there is I quickly used a separate piece of technology that integrates with the analytics technology, with QlikSense. That's external. And that's one thing that we're seeing, as James talking about, is all these technologies are coming together, and they need to work nicely together, they need to work well together. So you need to be on modern architecture that can do those type of things. We did not design QlikSense to do voice search. It just happened because technology is there to do it. So we'll filter down on these low performers. All the visuals richly update for me, and I can even do some touch actions to get the really low performers if I want to really move in on those people. I'm getting a very good sense of the data in the middle here with the sales versus margin chart. And if I want to get a little bit more sense for that, I can look at it in a deeper view. I didn't have to set anything up here. The visualization adjusted to my screen, and it even marked the outliers for me. As I look at this, I may want to look at it from more of a mapping perspective. I may want to look at it in a different visualization, and I can go over to the map here, and I see right away that the low performers are selling mainly in California. I can continue my analytics. I can continue to move through looking at things like understanding the structure of the data, or sort of the general overview of the data, as well as the detail. And over time, as I work through the analytics, I'm going to eventually come through and have some conclusions that I want to share. So when I want to do that, I can simply go out to a story. I have one that is pre-created, and I can start to present what I found. Is we have some bottom performers. They are not selling well on certain high-margin products, and so forth. I can move through my presentation. Now, the thing is, what I find whenever I'm presenting is inevitably somebody says, well, wait a minute. I don't believe your data, or I want to discuss this. And that's where we really move into that social trend of information activism. Everybody wants to tell stories. Everybody wants to talk about the information they're looking at, and we want to be able to really get down to those details together in order so the entire group can move together in the right direction. So I at any time can just move back into the story, from the story, and go back into my source. And that will move me back into the analytics. So now we can have a deeper discussion about this is exactly where I got that information from, and we can discuss that. And one thing that I think is really compelling with QlikSense is it's set up for the future. And one thing I know is whenever I'm thinking of what the future is going to look, I look to the entertainment industry. And when I find myself, when I'm being entertained these days, I'm never being entertained by on one screen or one device. I'm often moving to multiple devices. The second screen experience, you hear about that. So when we're dealing with technology that's built on modern web technology, we have all of that available to us. So perhaps we're looking at the screen on the left on a large monitor, and someone could be saying, well, that's interesting. What about what's going on with this particular individual or this cluster here? And you notice everything updates on both screens together. So you can start to have this multiple screen experience, and that's really going to drive the social trend of information activism. So where does this leave everybody from the IT side and the actual business trends? So we talked, James talked about this role of going from a gatekeeper to a storekeeper. And where that really takes off in QlikSense is when users want to start to build their own content. Inevitably, users, they want something different than what's been presented to them. So all the users are able to just create whatever they'd like. Of course, security can disable this, but I might want to create a new sheet. And the level that I want to engage in my creation is completely up to me. So perhaps I want to just recombine something someone else has left behind me. So there's visualizations with artifacts here, been left behind me. I want to see sales by state. I can just bring that in how I choose. I might want to bring in another visualization like this, and I can drag those in. So that's great. I'm able to do that very easily. It takes, if you can read, you can touch, and you can drag, you can build what you want. From there, though, we may want to do a little bit more. Maybe I want to work a little bit more with the data, and maybe I want to build something myself. So I can do that as well. The key here is this allows IT to be that storekeeper. They've left behind artifacts for me, or the BI department has left behind these artifacts for me, and I can use them how I see fit, but I can trust in them to be governed, and I can trust in them to remain up to date, and also my colleagues can trust in them as well. So here I'll create another little chart. Maybe I have some dimensions that are pre-prepared here, and I can maybe take product groups, throw those in, and maybe I'll put some measures in such as budget numbers. I'll add that in, and sales numbers. There should be sales right there. So really quickly I've been able to create my own visualizations like this, and I can see what's happening there. Now, I not only can do that, but I can change it however I want as well. So after looking at it, what I found is, as a business user and also someone supporting business users for my career, is often I don't know what I want till I see it. So I can just go back in here, and maybe it would look better in a scatter plot. I can adjust it like that, and we'll convert it over to a scatter plot. So I've been able to leverage the changing role of IT here. I've been able to do information exploration, and I have this huge amount of speed and agility to get what I want when I want it. And not only that, to get what I want when I want it, but as well, I can go out and I can share it with other people. And I can publish it out to others so that they can leverage what I've created. So it builds that ecosystem, and now it says published by me, so others will now will be able to see the new sheet that I created, the way I'm looking at the analytics. The one thing I haven't touched on is that piece, that diagnostic piece. I've been able to move through data and do some diagnostics, but it really is underpinned by the technology that enables you to do that. The reason that the mechanic can just go and plug into your car is because the technology exists to do that. All the monitoring is there, all the pieces are connected. And we get that up at the top here in Qlik Sense. So you can see I get this green, white, and gray. And the thing about this that I find very interesting is this is actually the oldest thing of what Qlik has provided, this concept of green, white, and gray. So the green is what I've selected on. The gray is what's unassociated, and actually we have two shades of gray. We have light gray and dark gray, and that tells us the closeness of unassociation. So light gray are nearby but unassociated to our current selections, and then dark gray is totally unassociated. And then the white gives you what's associated with what you're focused on. And we can see that across the entire data set and the entire data model that we have. So we can understand that how everything's related in our data, and that really enhances the diagnosis and puts that information set right in front of you, so you can then move through your information. So in the interest of time here, I'm sure there's several questions that have come through. I'll stop now. Do go check out Qlik Sense yourself if you'd like to. We have it on our demo website, as well as you can download Qlik Sense Desktop for free. So James, I have a few questions come in there. James, you're still on mute, possibly? Let me see. I seem to be having audio challenges. So I will.
Yeah, we do. I'm back. I don't know what
you're
the
back.
problem was. I was unmuted on WebEx, but you still couldn't hear me. So that's a joy. So yeah, we had a bunch of questions, and I'll handle the first three, and then we'll see how we go from there. So the first question was, is data discovery and data mining taxonomy the same? No, not really. Data discovery, there is overlap between data discovery and data mining. If you think about data mining as using machine-based processing to find patterns in large data sets, then there is an intentional overlap in terms of what you can do, but the disciplines, the AI, the neural networks, etc., tend to be in the hands of data scientists. We can take advantage of those models in Qlik, but the taxonomy is similar, but I suppose the method for doing so is somewhat different. Where there are overlaps, for example, in things like cluster analysis, where if you think about this, the statistical and data mining approach would be to use k-means to find the clusters, which would be extremely effective. You can visually find clusters as well, and what we're doing is we're giving a wider group of people the ability to find visual patterns and outliers, explore those through the interactivity, and then if necessary go and test out the correlation validity of those with a data scientist or somebody of that ilk. So I think there's an ability to unplug some of the blockers that existed between what used to be called operations research and data science and your ordinary decision makers, business decision makers. The next question, scenario, I know my data, I know my customers, but I'm not a good storyteller. How will QlikView help me tell my story? Well, Qlik Sense, well, there are two parts of that because we have QlikView and Qlik Sense, two products. QlikView, the way that you would tell stories within QlikView would be primarily through shared sessions where you're collaborating with people at the same time and you can annotate that. So effectively, you're not expected to present a beautiful narrative to them. You could have an environment where you are together sharing, if you're remotely, some data and doing the storytelling that way. In Qlik Sense, there is discrete storytelling functionality, which Josh shows, which allows you to capture particular insights and bookmark the data at the point the insight was made, and then you can walk people through that insight with your reasoned argument, logical reasoned argument, and they can do exactly what Josh said, which is say, well, I don't believe you, and then you can go and explore the data together and by flicking straight back into the live information. It's a very interesting interaction model, and it helps people get to the point where they're closer to driving some action. So I don't think it can help you make you a good storyteller, but it can certainly help provide a mechanism for doing that that's directly connected to the data and in the same flow. So it's not a broken flow flicking out of Microsoft into a Microsoft Office tool or something like that. So Really, it's interesting. Those of you that have followed TED Talks will be aware probably of a guy called Hans Rosling, Professor Hans Rosling. He does a fantastic TED Talk where he showed really data around world health using interactive and animated scatter plots. And all of the BI vendors at the time, that's a good 4 or 5 years, maybe more ago, got all excited and built copycat functionality, thereby missing the point. The point was that Professor Rosling is a great storyteller, and we can't do that for people, but we can certainly give you some of the tools to try and get in that direction. But no, certainly that's beyond our abilities. Question 3, how do we balance the need for intuitive visuals against US government requirements for 508 compliance? That's a brilliant question. It's one that's been around for a long time. I mean, you know, disability legislation around how you represent information is very, very important. The simplest attribute of that is dealing with red-green color blindness. If you look at the data sets that come, the default colors that come within Qlik Sense, they are designed not to fall foul of Section 508. However, we're firm believers in that although we can give good practice as a default, people will probably want to break them, not least of which because their corporate standards may require them to deliver information in certain colors. So it's an interesting question from a software design and experience point of view, and one that affects all of the vendors in this space. You know, we can, as we say, lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So we attempt to give people the ability to be aware of those requirements, but also the latitude and freedom where they want to break the rules to do so, even though that might not necessarily be the right thing. Somebody said, can I provide a quote for the example that I gave about 30% uplift? I will do that for you as an email after the fact when I find my source. And I will take one more question because we've got one more minute. How does one validate the quality of data being analyzed across so many sources and volumes? The short answer to that is you cannot, and that is another trend that needs to be discussed. Obviously, where information is audited, it's financial information, then the data quality is paramount because there is a regulatory requirement for it to be so, and there's a whole industry of auditors that do that. That's what all that's about, journaling and intercompany eliminations and all that stuff. Internally, we can strive for good data quality based upon building in maybe a data stewardship program to make sure that the data that flows into our organization is as good as it can be within tolerances. And I think this is the key point that I found when I've been advising organizations for a long time, that perfect data quality, perfection is the enemy of progress, apart from where there is a legal requirement. What you have to establish in your organization is a tolerance level that you will accept, that is based upon a stewardship program where they rate the data, or perhaps from the output of a data quality tool that says this is 80% good or 90% good. And that question becomes even more relevant, the question of tolerances, when you think about external data sources or data sources that are more qualitative in nature, etc. So we need to change the way our organizations view quality and how you apply quality rules to different types of data based upon, I suppose, a preset schema. So that's the short answer to that one. So I think we're out of time. Colleen, I think we are exactly, well, we're 1 minute over. So I guess
great. Thank you, James, and thank you, Josh. We would like to thank everybody for joining today. There were a lot of questions that came in that we didn't get to, so I will work with James and Josh to make sure that we reach out to you individually to answer your questions. As I mentioned earlier, this session has been recorded, so all attendees will receive a link to the on-demand, most likely by end of day. As a reminder, for more information, we welcome you to visit Qlik.com, where you can find white papers, case studies, demos, and free downloads of both QlikView and Qlik Sense. Thanks again for joining, and have a wonderful day.